profession, and he's been a social worker for many, many years, having graduated from Clark Atlanta University and originally from UAPB. That's what they say. Is that right? Unless they say AM and N or normal. So he also has been in the social work field for, and also in the substance abuse field with Recovery Centers of Arkansas, um, Kids for the Future, Youth Dimensions, Woodridge Behavioral Care, and currently at HLH Consultants and Better Community Developers. I introduce you to the panel. Now, Judge Humphrey, would you please come forward and talk with us about your son? I'm going to try to share the news photo that I saw, and we'll see how that goes. If it doesn't go, don't worry, we're still good. But would you please begin, Judge Humphrey?
Thank you very much, Dr. Tolliver, and to Dr. Burst, and to all the social workers, including Pam Abrams, who's also a lawyer, and she is in court, so she can interrupt me at any time to tell me what is going on in the criminal law these days. And of course, to my esteemed panelists, co-panelists, it's very good to be here today. I will talk some about my son's situation to the extent I think it might be appropriate. There may be some other matters taken care of in the future, so I don't want to involve that. But back in August, he was stopped on his way home to Little Rock. He was driving a U-Haul. He, along with Dr. Tolliver's granddaughter, are third-year law students at the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. And because of the fact that they can now do their courses virtually because of COVID, then he decided that there was no point in his renewing a lease agreement in Fayetteville when he could come home to Little Rock, where he prefers to live, and stay at a place owned by his parents, and he could beat the rent. He could beat it by a whole lot by coming home. And I think your granddaughter, Shari, did she go to Texas, Dr. Tolliver?
Yes.
She's down there. Well, this is what they're doing. They take their classes on computer now, so there's no need of staying in Fayetteville when you can get to a city that you really feel comfortable in, much more comfortable in familiar surroundings, and also beat that rent. So he was driving this U-Haul, and he was supposed to have started off earlier that morning, but being my child, he did not have his U-Haul packed in time. And he had anticipated having some people assist him in unloading it once he got to the house he's going to be living in Little Rock. He is now living in Little Rock, but because he was so late starting out from Fayetteville, and he was also tired, he thought about taking an exit in Russellville to get a room for the night. He was not going to stay with us because he was going to quarantine at his own house, but he needed his furniture in his house in order to spend the night. And by the time he left out of there, he was going to have to get in a hotel in Little Rock that night. And so he said he was tired and saw that exit in Russellville and knew from having stopped at Cracker Barrel, so there are some hotels in that area. Well, then he was hesitant about taking that which exit the Cracker Barrel was. And so he started off, and then he got back on the road. That's all it was to it. Well, an officer, a state trooper, came behind him, put his blue lights on, had him pull over, and stopped him and began interrogating him simply because of that. And my son explained probably much more than he had to, but he was being courteous and being respectful of the officers. He explained to him that he was, when the officer wanted to know where was he going, he said, well, he made a mistake. He wasn't sure, rather, not so much a mistake, but he was uncertain about which exit to take. The officer couldn't appreciate and understand why, if he was headed to Little Rock, or was he thinking about spending the night in Russellville. The officer didn't understand a lot of other things. When he told him he was 32 years old and he was in law school, the trooper, if you watch the video, he couldn't understand that. Why would a person who's 32 years old be in school? And he then called me when he got stopped, and I got on the phone with him, and the officer just kept saying he was acting real nervous. He wanted to search his U-Haul. And so at first my son said no. Then the officer said he was going to call for a dog. And my son said, well, go ahead and search. But then he said, no, you've been so nervous, I'm going to call for the dog anyway. As it turns out, he called for a dog that was brought by an officer of United States Forestry Service. I don't know what kind of dogs they have at the Forestry Service to participate in this kind of stop. The officer said he had this reasonable suspicion of my son. I think that's what he'll probably use in court, reasonable suspicion, because he was acting in a nervous condition. That's what he said. And he talked for him a good while. And then when the dog got there, there was an alert from the dog after a long time. And there was a third officer who showed up. I think he was from Russellville Police Department. So all these people out there. Okay, once the alert, the dog gave an alert, then he handcuffed, my son is Marion Jr., we call him Andrew. He handcuffed Andrew and put him in the back of the seat. He was there for over an hour, and you can't sit at a straight angle when you have your hands cuffed behind your back for all of this time. My son gets emotional, so he was very upset. Before he was put in the car, he said, Daddy, he arrest him. Daddy, he's arresting me. And he was just concerned. He was concerned they might harm him. You know, if you look at his video, you can tell he was really distressed. And so they put him in there. They keep him there. They go all through his belongings in that U-Haul. And at the end, over an hour and 15 minutes or so, they find nothing. After unzipping the cushions of his couch, after just having him in that uncomfortable position, not even checking to see if he needed to use the bathroom or anything like that, then he comes back, and knowing he hasn't found anything, the other two officers leave. This particular trooper then proceeds with my son still handcuffed in the back of this vehicle. He goes and he pulls down the door of the U-Haul. Then he comes to the hood of his vehicle, and he messes around with some stuff there, and he writes out a report. And the report is only a warning. Well, it would seem to me that if you have figured out that you can't find anything here, it's a false alert on the part of their dog, and we need to deal with false alerts too. That's not the only situation where I know of a so-called dog having a false alert. But rather than you taking the time to pull down the door of the U-Haul and doing your report on the hood, why don't you uncuff his hands first? Give him some comfort. You have nothing on him. He is a citizen, and all he's doing is driving home. And you find out that whatever your suspicions are, they aren't based on anything. I don't think that they meet the legal test for reasonable suspicion to do all this in the first place. And certainly not probable cause, which is much stronger determination and standard for arresting a person. And I would think that anytime you're handcuffed in a vehicle like that, you're under arrest. I don't care what they call it. If they say it's for officer protection or whatever. They knew he didn't have anything on him. If you watch the video, they know he's not impaired. And the reason you know right off that he's not impaired is because he never bothers about giving him a field sobriety test. He never questions whether or not he can function. You do the heel to toe, you do all kinds of things, the nystagmus test, any of those kinds of things. Nothing was done. So he knew there was no impairment. And my son went on to tell him exactly what was going on with him, but he was subjected to this kind of treatment anyway by a trooper who has a history of misconduct, in my opinion, based upon a situation in Dover, Arkansas, that involved a white woman and her son. He saw them walking towards each other, and he became suspicious when he saw them stop and talk. And the basis of his suspicion was that the boy was much bigger than this woman. I don't know if there was something about that young man in particular, whether he was mixed or something, because Dover, doesn't have any black folks. I don't think, I'm not sure about that, but my impression is it doesn't. And from there, those folks ended up in the back seat and even tased. And so there was a settlement in U.S. District Court, not against him, even though he created the whole situation. He created it. Settlement pertained to the deputy from Pope County, where Russellville is the county seat, because he was the one who actually used the taser rather than this guy. But this guy, Payton, is the one who created that. Then, and he was a marshal for Dover at the time. They hired him as a state trooper anyway. So my son is now represented by Connor Eldridge, who is a former United States attorney for the Western District of Arkansas. It just so happened that he is a student law clerk for Connor and has known Connor a long time. And so Connor is his attorney of record. And he's going to proceed on some matters that way. But the whole thing about it is that these officers operate believing that they are immunized from any kind of lawsuit, and it's called qualified immunity. And during the Democratic primary, there was a lot of discussion of getting rid of qualified immunity, particularly after all of these deaths of unarmed Black citizens. The police run in and they assert qualified immunity. That's something that came down from a case of the U.S. Supreme Court back in 1967. It's a qualified immunity doctrine. It was because it was at the height of civil rights. And the reason is that the courts did not want a whole lot of lawsuits or a lot of judgments against officers, even if there was excessive or deadly force, because of the fact that creates a fear, I guess, among some officers that they shouldn't take some actions that they think need to be taken in order to preserve the peace. And they think that there'll be a whole lot of lawsuits, and either they would have to pay or the jurisdictions for whom they work would have to pay. So the U.S. Supreme Court gave them this qualified immunity doctrine. That was supposed to be a pretty liberal court back then. That was the Earl Warren Court in 1967 that gave that, because people would file lawsuits under under Section 1983. That's one of the old civil rights laws passed after the end of slavery, and it made it illegal and improper for actions to be taken while an officer or someone is acting under color of state law that they couldn't do. Let me just read that right quickly. Every person who, under color of any statute, ordinance, regulation, custom, or usage of any state or territory or the District of Columbia, subjects or causes to be subjected any citizen of the United States or the person within the jurisdiction thereof to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured by the Constitution and laws shall be liable to the party injured. And that was done after slavery. And when we're using that still, that was sort of toned down, though, by the Supreme Court's ruling back in 1967. I mean, concerning that case that I referred to earlier, so that officers now think they can use qualified immunity. Well, that's going to continue to be an issue. But the whole thing about it is that a lot of the officers function under the assumption that, they're really immune. As someone told me who is an officer, officers function with an entitlement attitude, that they are entitled to take certain actions against citizens. And here, obviously, he wasn't investigating a crime with my son because there was no crime. There was nothing to investigate. He had no tip from anybody that there is someone coming through on I-40 driving a U-Haul who is transporting drugs. We call those bolos. Be on the lookout. There was no bolo sent to this Trooper Payton saying, be on the lookout for this. And the fact that my son is nervous, it's like, well, what do you expect a young Black person to be these days? This is August of 2020. You heard of Breonna Taylor, you heard of Ahmaud Arbery, you heard of George Floyd, you heard of any of these situations. What do you think? And especially someone who's minding his own business. Now,
Judge,
go ahead.
Okay, we're going to take that as the opportunity to go into the next segment, but I want to tell you, I know that you have already gotten a lot of people up in arms with what you have already said, and thank you for sharing. I hope that you'll come back at the end as we talk about tips for getting people home safely, because you are the very person I was thinking about as we talked about that. So thank you for getting us started. I want to go on and ask Dwight Merritt if you will come forward. Please unmute your phone and your mic, and provide us with one or two historical perspectives on what the relationship between African Americans and the law enforcement is. And as you heard Judge Humphrey, he's already taken us there from a historical point of view. So if you begin with that question, Mr. Merritt.
Thank you, Dr. Tolliver. Listen, I had jotted down a few notes to emphasize how important the talk, quote unquote, is in a family situation, in the community, etc. Let me start out with a quote. Every generation we fail to address racial discrimination in our institution is a generation of African American children who grew up learning to silence and diminish themselves. Mommy, the darkest people get shooted and killed, and sometimes a little bit lighter ones too. 4-year-old Quest McEwen mused to his mother a few months ago, as his mother Tess McEwen listened in shock. So that's why I want to be good, he continues. Maybe I shouldn't talk like this so I don't get died. Quest wasn't done, Fred. And let me interject here. I really thought at the onset, you have a talk with your son when he's a preteen or adolescent, but not at 4 years old. Quest wasn't done fretting, however, when on a more recent morning, he worded aloud that he didn't know if Daddy was dead because his father had come home late the night before. Like scores of Black and brown families throughout the United States, the McEwens are struggling with the delicate but brutal act of protecting their children's innocence, while at the same time educating them about the realities of what it means to be Black in America. But these parents and their children, the talk has nothing to do with the birds and the bees. It's about surviving police encounters, being aware of your rights and learning how to live within a complex, systemic, centuries-old framework of race-based prejudice, violence, and discrimination. The talk is akin to a rite of passage for many African American children, especially boys and young men. Essentially, they are taught how to behave in the presence of police to mitigate potential harm. No sudden movements, don't question why you're being stopped, comply with all verbal commands, never ever raise your voice. Make it home alive. Is a discussion many Black parents consider a necessary evil, dreading the day when their children go from innocence to threats in the eyes of a historically racist society. Tessa McEwen is a Filipino American, and Jelani, her husband, is African American. Say they were shocked to hear the heartbreaking adult musings of their son, not because of what he said, but because he was only 4 years old. Now he and his 8-year-old sister Vi are already growing acutely aware of how instances of police brutality, injustice, and racial discrimination impact children and parents who look like them. They saw Alton Sterling's son crying. They are aware of all the things going on with Black dads and Black parents. As they grow, they need to know about the America that will not accept them for who they are. Yet they want them to be committed to living life on their terms in the face of all these things. Parents wrestle with how concrete they should be. But children are like sponges, and we as adults sometimes undervalue how much they're really hearing and how much they're really feeling. Black parents struggle with explaining this sense of antipathy and inequality while ensuring in turn that their children remain self-confident and accepting. It is a really fine line to walk, explaining the reality, but not scaring them, not making them so distrustful of white people or police. We've come a long way as a people, but racism has changed over the years. But it's a surprise that generations later, the talk hadn't changed a lot. The talk is both a protective tool and an equalizer of sorts, as Black parents must explain that to their children, this proportionate police brutality is something that can and often does happen to Black men and women, regardless of their income, education, or status in society. The feeling of invalidation is one of the intangibles Black parents are tasked with explaining to their children, even when they haven't come to terms with those emotions themselves. So, historically, there is a study called Can I Live? That was done by the George Warren Brown School of Social Work. And a brief excerpt from that goes, the criminalization of and subsequent state-sanctioned violence aimed at Black individuals and community is a social issue that has permeated American society since the establishment of the United States. From slave patrols aimed at maintaining white supremacy by terrorizing Blacks during slavery to the killing of unarmed Michael Brown. Minorities and especially Black men have been a target of police abuse at disproportionately higher levels than other racial and ethnic. What that speaks to is our role as social workers, our role as mental health professionals, and as community activists, getting involved, advocating, just educating society as a whole, get involved in the rooms where policies are made, and advocating for our people as a whole. So with that, Laverne and Dr. Tolliver, I will close with that.
Well, thank you. Okay, full disclosure, he is my cousin. Okay. So I want to move to Mr. Hicks, and thank you very much for setting that up and also for providing a bit of that historical information. Mr. Hicks, I would like for you to do the same. If you will, unmute your mic now and provide us with some of the historical information as well as what Mr. Merritt did a little bit earlier. Talk about why we're still in need of having that talk. And Mr. Merritt and Judge Humphrey tied into that. But if you will put a little bit more of that icing on the cake or the meat in the bun.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tolliver and Dr. Burks, along with Mr. Merritt, who I've known for close to 50 years now, and Judge Humphrey, who I've always heard about over the years here in the great state of Arkansas and the work that he's done on the bench. and to all of you who are members of the Central Arkansas Association of Black Social Workers. This is a topic that has long been denied discussing at great lengths, as it should be. And I hope that on this occasion, it will serve as a platform and a jumping off point for us to be more consistent in our efforts to have these discussions, because the talk can vary from home to home, from ghetto to middle class. It is a conversation where I know during my time, in my generation, I didn't have that talk. It was, boy, don't go over there across Hillsborough Road when I was growing up in El Dorado, Arkansas. Or when I was in the Midwest growing up in an integrated community, it was, boy, don't cross 6th Avenue after 8 o'clock at night. And it was nothing more than that. And the reasons associated with it, because you could get the message that you would be in great harm or putting yourself at great harm if you chose to do those kinds of things. We are challenged more than anything in these days and times of our reticence in terms of not fully understanding that it is government and the application of government that prevents us collectively as Black people in this country from being in a position to exercise the type of expressions and influence that we can in order to change these conditions. One of the really important expressions Judge Humphrey made about qualified immunity, most of us have little or no understanding about what qualified immunity is. But guess what? It impacts every Black male, woman, and child in this country and in this nation. And as such, it needs to be confronted at the political sense, because there is absolutely no reason why police officers, who are just like all of us, human beings, should be in a position where they can be protected and covered based on the actions they take against Black males and Black women, because now Black women are not absolved from acts of brutality, period. There are many, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, we can go on and on about that. So we know that we are all victims of this circumstance and situation. So the question becomes, what do we do about it? One of the things that I personally believe that we should, could, and must do about it is become more engaged in the political process. That is where the rubber meets the road. If we don't have somebody who is sitting on city boards of directors, county quorum courts, county commissions, in the state legislature, who understand these issues and these challenges, you can always rest on the fact that the indifference we've already endured for 400 plus years will continue to be the same. I can tell you from my own personal experience, when I was a sophomore in college at AM&N College, and Dr. Tolliver, we called it AM&N, AKA the Yard, just for clarity's sake. When I was there in my sophomore year, I was at a house party on the east side of Pine Bluff, Judge Humphrey's hometown. And we were all having a wonderful time. And then all of a sudden there was a commotion and somebody said, man, you know, there's a brother outside, the police has stopped. So curious Black folks, as we have a tendency to be, we go out and take a look, and there it was, Pine Bluff police officers just manhandling this brother and slapping him across the head and pushing him. And we're observing. So being the unfortunate kind of personality I am, I had the nerve to go out and ask them, why are you all doing that? And they in turn told me, if you don't shut up, you're gonna get the same going back in the house. And I said, no, I'm not going back in the house until y'all stop slapping him around, which they continue to do. And then as they continue to direct their attention to me about me being sassy enough to inquire and asked them about what they doing. Ended up taking my little 143-pound self and putting me in the back of the police car and taking me down to the Pine Bluff jail. Now, on the way down there was a lot of talk about how we gonna take you the long way back to the jailhouse. I said, well, you can take me any way you want to, as long as you don't touch me. And they said, oh, this is a smart nigga. And when I said that, I immediately said, Larry, shut up. Don't say nothing else. Made it already bad for yourself. But at any rate, I ended up getting taken down. And a friend of mine came and got me out of jail. His father, who Judge Humphrey knows very well, was one of the more prominent Black attorneys in the city of Pine Bluff. His name was George Howard Jr., who later became a federal judge, the first Black federal judge in the Southeast down here, appointed by President Clinton. And Judge Howard represented me in court. And they charged me with trying to incite a riot, if you can believe that. And Judge Howard made them look so stupid and foolish that the judge himself even got upset at the prosecuting attorney and said, this case is thrown out of court. And if you ever bring something like that to me like that again, I'm gonna make sure your license is taken away from you. I said, Judge, I agree. And Attorney Howard said, Larry, shut up, which I had to do. But the point is, we are constantly being exposed to these kinds of conditions and circumstances. And I hope and I pray, and we preach to constantly, that one of the most formidable approaches that we believe that can make changes in how we can protect our young men is to get engaged in political process, elect people to office who have a full and complete understanding of what this condition is and how it's surrounded us for years on end. That can be a beginning step.
Well, I think that you have got a few people on board with you with regard to their being actively involved in this process. And I hope that we'll have a few more in this next generation. Thank you very much, Mr. Hicks. I'm going to turn this part over to Dr. Burse. I believe that we have a few questions, Dr. Burse.
Yes.
In just 2 or 3 minutes, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And then we'll come back to them, as you know, at the end.
Okay, good deal. This question is for Judge Humphrey. The question is, did you stay on the call during the entire time your son was having this experience with the police?
No, I was on the phone with him while he was outside of his U-Haul being questioned. But once there was a dog alert and they decided to put him inside the vehicle, I couldn't speak to him. He couldn't speak on his phone.
Okay. As a father, Judge Humphrey, how did you respond or react to what was going on with your son?
That's tough because I've seen what's going on now. And I'm, as a father, first of all, at the end of the deal, I couldn't be mad. I was too thankful that, first of all, they didn't physically harm him and they didn't plant any evidence. But that's what I was concerned about, too. Not only the physical harm, but planting the evidence. And I think that's one of the reasons he was so emotionally distraught. He knew he was a third-year law student. If someone planned some evidence against him, that could be the end of his legal career before he'd even get started. And so we were concerned about that. And I was at my office at night working on something, and I called my wife and told her, come on over, pick me up, and let's head to Russellville. Then we came back to the house because I said, well, if they arrest him, I'm gonna need some clothes to wear to court in the morning. So I better go home and get me some change in clothes and get my CPAP machine. So we came back. When we started off, he called and said they just let him go. He was on the way home, and we said, we're coming anyway to escort you back to Little Rock. And there's no point in that, but this happens to people in a lot of places. Fortunately for him, he did not, he was very polite with the officer. And not everybody will be like that. All these young people aren't going to take that, and they don't know how to address them. And so he really had no reason to do anything to him to suggest that he was resisting. And my son, you know, he's quick. He had put stuff on on Facebook before they got him into the vehicle. He's just that quick on it, and so people were checking him out, and it was going viral. And I think that also caused some concern. Now, the other thing, I had called the number 2 person in the state police during the time they were talking to him outside of the U-Haul, and he didn't call me right back. I called him before I left my office. He said, "Well, they're just doing the ordinary things, you know, checking him out because it was stopping, all that kind of stuff." So the next morning, I texted him and I said, I thank you for calling up there. However, I'm displeased with my son being held in the back of that car for all that time.
Yes.
And you all need to get some new dogs.
Yes.
Or retrain your dogs, or stop lying on these dogs.
Yes.
Now, that's what's going on too. That's the second case I'm aware of where there's a false alert from the dogs, and there's one person.
Absolutely. And just due to the sake of time, I have one more question, but thank you so much for addressing that. Dr. Bell Tolliver, did we want to take one more question, or we want to continue as we're moving?
I think we probably need to continue. You know what? This is a powerful conversation.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. This is powerful. I think what we'll do, I'm going to try to show the clip. It is an hour and a half long. I mean, I'm sorry, 1 minute, 1 minute and 52 seconds long. I'm trying to do too many things at one time. And I need to know if you all can hear when I get to this. Just 1 second.
We also had a really good question in the chat that I would like for you at the end of the video to answer. And the question was asking, at what age do you recommend having this talk with your children? Is it an age that is too young to start having conversations? So if the panelists can think about it as Dr. Bell Tolliver is getting ready to show this 1 minute or so video, because I would like to have that question answered.
Okay. I'm trying to go to the recording so I can share that. Well, let me see if I can pull it up a different way, because I have it on my screen, but I don't think that you can see it yet.
Did you share the screen? Once you share the screen, you're
right.
able to.
Well, I don't see it on this part. Just one second. If I can't get it, then I will we'll go to some of the questions that they have, some of the 10 questions that they have.
Let me see if I can pull it up.
There it is. Great, thank you.
Rules. 10 rules.
10 rules.
10 rules of survival.
10 rules of survival if stopped by the police. Number 1, be polite.
Show the video part.
When stopped by the police.
Be polite.
Be respectful. Remember that your goal is to get home safely.
Your goal is to get home safely.
Your goal is to get home safely. I'm sorry. Number 2, if you feel your rights have been violated, you and your parents have a right to file a formal complaint with your local police jurisdiction.
Number 3, do not, under any circumstances, get in an argument with the police.
Number 4, always remember that anything you say or do can be used against you in court.
Number 5,
Keep your hands in plain sight. Make sure the police can see your hands at all times.
Number 6, avoid physical contact with police officers. Do not make any sudden movements and keep your hands out of your pockets.
Number 7.
Do not.
Do
Do
not.
not, do not, do not, do not.
Do not run, even if you are afraid.
If you're afraid.
Number 8, even if you believe you are innocent, do not resist arrest.
Number 9, if you are arrested, do not make any statements about the incident until you are able to meet with a lawyer or public defender. Number 10, stay calm and remain in control.
Watch your words. Watch your body language.
Watch your emotions. Remember,
Remember,
Your goal is to get home safely.
get home safely.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I could not do it, so I'm so glad that you had the backup. I wanted to just kind of go back over those questions that they had, those 10 rules that they had that were listed there, because those are so important. And they said to be respectful and polite when stopped by the police. Keep your mouth closed. Remember that your goal is to get home safely. If you feel that your rights have been violated, you and your parents have the right to file a formal complaint. We're going to share those with you all in a little bit. But what I want to do here is to ask you, Mr. Merritt, if you will start, do you have any rules that you would like to add? And the reason for this is, again, just as you all have mentioned, even in our best, we know that these rules may not keep everyone safe and alive, but we want to do our best to do so. Do you have any 1 or 2 rules that you would like to add to that list? 1 or 2?
Not necessarily during the encounter, but I think we hadn't spoke at all about what happens after the encounter. Now, Judge Humphrey's son is somewhat privy, his father's well known. Well, what happens to the kid who doesn't have that kind of influence? That's where our role as mental health professionals come in. I think there's a certain amount of trauma that's encountered during that period of verbal abuse, possibly even physical abuse. So that leaves an indelible stain on a person's personality. And we as mental health professionals need to address that. That's of paramount importance, I think. As far as these rules are concerned, they're pretty common sense. And when should you address that, the talk with your child? I think that depends on where the child is in the developmental stage. You know your child better than anyone else. So, but it is imperative that you do address it with him or her, for that matter. I mean, in the age of information, children get much more information than I ever had, all at one time with minimal ability to process it. So it is important that we have that talk.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Mr. Hicks, would you like to add 1 or 2 rules to this list?
Well, the only things that I would say additionally to that is if the young man believes that he has little or no understanding about why he is being arrested, there is absolutely no reason why he cannot or should not ask for the officer's name and badge number for that to be a part of his position in regard to what happened in the scenario. So that's all that I would add to it. Everything else, I think, is applicable. But I
Has
believe
that
that
ever been seen as a threatening thing, even though it is something they should be able to ask? Has that ever been perceived as threatening?
it depends on who the officer is.
Okay.
Oftentimes, most will not be cooperative, and they'll think you're trying to be smart alecky, but there's nothing wrong with a person asking for that because they're entitled to that information.
Thank you. Judge Humphrey.
Yes. Well, I think whatever time, as Mr. Merritt said, I just ditto what he said. When the child is ready for it, and these kids do watch television, they have questions about what happened to Breonna Taylor. If the child is asking those type questions, that's the time to have a talk with them, I think. But let me say something to social workers in particular and to all of you. I think it's time out for us looking at police work as something that the police officers say is a right approach. I think it's time for the community to say what kind of policing we want. That trooper, a lot of police officers in the mindset that their work is done when they make a drug bust, when they find somebody transporting drugs. I think good police work is, if you think somebody has a traffic violation, talk to them about that traffic violation, hop back in your vehicle and go back to work somewhere else. Stop it there. You don't have to go further to try to find out if there's some drugs here and go looking for stuff. If you haven't observed anything, if you haven't had a tip of anything, I think good police work is to get back in your police car and go on about your business and let the citizen go about his or her business. And I think it's up to us to raise this, is to question their beliefs about what constitutes good police work.
Thank you so much. And I just can't help but say it really is helpful when a judge, with all of your experience of being on the bench and now seeing your son go through this experience, it's so helpful for you to be able to tell us, you know, what the way it really is and what police officers, attorneys, and anyone else should be able to do. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to go directly to Dr. Burrs to ask you what other questions or comments. I know we talked about main themes of the comments as well. What else was out there, Dr. Burrs?
So we only have a few minutes left, but one of the questions is how these experiences that each of you are sharing impact your life, and how has you used those experiences to further the work?
In my case, Dr. Burks, it got me involved in working in radio, and Black radio in particular. And it also made me get involved in politics at an early age. And then eventually it put me in a mindset that we need to run for public office, which I did do, and did so successfully on two different terms in a predominantly white county. I believe engagement really represents the most effective way by which we can make a difference in the outcome of the acts of brutality against Black people in this city, this county, throughout this nation.
Thank you. Mr. Merritt or Judge Humphrey, did you want to add anything to that question?
Did you have another question?
I'm curious. No, I just think we all have to stay vigilant and stay engaged, as you know, if I've just suggested to social workers, because, for instance, in your case, I think social workers need to have some dialogue with police departments about how you're dealing with criminal defendants who have mental health issues. And there are a whole lot of them like that. We're using jails to hold people who really have mental problems. And I think that's where you get the whole community involved in this. Isn't just a legal issue. It's not for legal professionals. These are community issues, how our community is going to look and how those who are in charge are going to behave towards us. So I think everyone has to be engaged and bring your professionalism into this discussion.
Well, Judge, I also think that we have psychologists on board. We have pastors on board with this panel. We have a social worker. So it's a collaborative kind of opportunity here, a window of opportunity, right?
Well,
do we have one last question, Dr. Burse, or comment?
I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. We only have like 1 minute left. So I wanted to do a wrap up, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bell Tolliver. So in spite of all the things, the uncertainties that are going on around our world, I do charge each and every one of you to engage in these critical conversations to address these injustices that are happening around the world. I challenge you to reach out to your state, local, and federal entities and make your voice count. Dr. Bell Tolliver.
Well, Dr. Burse, thank you so much for joining. This is our first joint effort. And so I'm looking forward to doing this again. But as they say, talk is cheap. So now it's time to put our words to action, right? And thank all of you who have been a part. Judge Humphrey, Judge Bell was also on this, as well as a number of other people. Thank you, Attorney Abrams, as well. We cannot do this on our own. And we knew that this would be a first step, right, President Alexander?
Yes.
So we are going to be actively engaged in taking up some of those suggestions that have just been laid out. We also want to just thank the students within the School of Social Work who have been present, because our generation cannot do it, for much longer. So we need this next generation, don't we, Gwen Allen and Gloria Fender? We need all of you all to come forward and get your boots on and start your activity. So thank you for allowing us to spend this hour with you.
Dr. Laverne, right quick. Is there some way that we can get this video out to others to share this with other people in our community? Because I would love to show this to the young people at my church, especially.
Yes, it is my hope that either Dr. Burse or Dr. Griffin were successful in recording this. And if so, then it is going to be able to be out there. I could not do it with everything I was doing on my screen because it would not allow me to do that.
Yes, it appears that it's on Facebook, and it's also on in the chat, AAPB Facebook.
Yay, thank you, Dr. Griffin. Yes. Thank you, or Dr. Holmes, whichever one of you did it.
Okay, thank you.
Everyone have a blessed rest of your Saturday. Dr. Holmes has already sent you the information about it. Would you
I think Judge Humphreys was trying to say something also.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I see a question in the chat from Dr. Griffin. When should counseling begin? I think it should begin immediately after people have had these kinds of traumatic experiences.
I would agree.
Absolutely.
And Dr. Tolliver, everybody wear a mask.
Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've seen on your chats, you're probably able to see that it's released on Facebook, YouTube page soon.
Yes.
And Arkansas Association, someone was saying something. Go ahead. Okay, Arkansas Association of Black Psychology Professionals. I just love it. You all like that, the AABP page, because they have a lot of other discussions that you need to see and hear. They've been talking about some things like this for a little while, but I especially want us to join with the mental health discussion with perhaps the mayor as well as others, so that we can make sure that they understand just because you have mental health issues doesn't mean you belong in a jail. All right, thank you again.
Have a great afternoon and thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.